Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
George.
Cliff. Nicholas.
Jonas.
Bob. Bill.
Kurt. Raoul.
Jim. Bill. Bob. Peter. Peter. Art. David. Buzz. Steve. Steve.
Cliff.
Bill.
And who's here for the first time or the second time? This morning, our speaker is Venerable Losang Monlam, the Monthly Spiritual Program Coordinator for the Tse Chen Ling Center for Tibetan Studies. Everything out of my head, including the news.
Anyway, thank you for inviting me back to talk. This morning I wanted to just share some thoughts on what we call karma, or the law of cause and effect. This is one topic that sometimes is difficult to kind of swallow, but there's different ways of approaching it, and I wanted to just share those with you, some of my own kind of personal exploration as well as taking teachings on the law of cause and effect. First of all, I think one thing to remember is that actually all that karma really is about is cause and effect, that every action has a result. Okay? And that's what makes up the basis of all of our experience. And this is true whether we're Buddhist or not. And I think even within this culture, we do accept cause and effect. And it's very easy to kind of see this, but sometimes we tend to ignore it when it comes to the Buddhist version of cause and effect. But, you know, just from a Western point of view, you turn the key in the car starts. That's cause and effect. You know, you eat food, you get less hungry, that's cause and effect. And the Buddhist teaching is really no more than that. It's just a little bit more refined, because some of the effects we cannot, with our gross understanding, cannot necessarily see the exact cause for that particular effect. And so some of the results, the relationship between the cause and the result is hidden. And so we have teachings from the Buddha who had more maybe experience in some of these things. So I think one thing is not to shy away from it, because we already accept it within our own culture and on many different levels. You know, you get a job, you get a paycheck. This is all the result of cause and effect. So it's not really much different than that. Now, to understand it maybe in a Buddhist perspective, we also want to look at it from a psychological point of view. Because some of what the Buddha was teaching is that the way we see things, the way we experience them, is the result of our own actions. Okay. And that the way we see the world out there externally is the result of our own mind. Okay, and I think the example I've even used here before is that, you know, I'm sitting here, and in robes, I'm a monk and all those things. And although it appears that I exist here from my own side, the way you all experience me is different. there are how many, 40 some different views of, or experiences of me sitting here. And that's based on our own past kind of view, or the different karmic imprints we've collected over time. Some of you may have kind of one view of somebody wearing robes. Somebody may have a different view because I'm a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner. So there's different ways of seeing things. Okay, and those ways of seeing things are a result of the imprints we've had in the past, the actions of body, speech, and mind in the past. So that our whole world is kind of flavored by these past actions, and the past ways of seeing things. And it is related to how we experience the world. And the law of cause and effect really is no more than an explanation on that. Is this making sense a little bit? Maybe. Another way of seeing things, I think, sometimes is just to go into some of the examples of the law of cause and effect for what is the result of a specific action. Because when we look at it that way, sometimes we can get it psychologically. It makes sense. In our Western culture, we wouldn't even deny it. For example, lying. What happens when we lie? People stop believing us. The words we speak have no value. People don't listen. Now, it doesn't take Buddha to tell us this. We can see it from our own experience. If somebody's going out there and lying, it's difficult for others to believe them. Right? I mean, it's just the way it is. And so there's different results we have with different actions. Lying is, and having people not believe us, is a result similar to the cause. The other action, the other result that happens from lying, for example, is that we develop a pattern. We come to believe in our own lies, and we tend to repeat that action over and over again. That is also a result of the action of lying. So what happens is not only do we have people stop believing us, but we get so habituated to the action that we repeat the behavior. And this, I mean, we can talk about the 10 non-virtues and their results, but even just, looking at our own particular lives, the foods we eat, the cars we drive, the things we do for entertainment, all these things through habit, we get a certain result from them that brings us pleasure, so we repeat them. So the law of cause and effect is really just about that kind of habituation, those kind of imprints, and how they picture the way, how they flavor the way we experience things. Another approach that I often talk about in terms of, this is when we talk about equanimity, is the way we see people. And I think Michael Moore did this in his film Killing for Columbine. Just the reinforcement we get through television. And he was talking about the way we see particularly Black and African Americans, because on television, in this documentary that he did, he talks about how much of the newscast and how this image is reinforced over and over and over again by watching the news. And so you come to tend to have a particular view, in this case African Americans, that then you believe is very real. This is no more than cause and effect. The imprints we keep on repeating do have an effect on the way our experience. And so the law of cause and effect is really just about that. Everything we experience, every moment, is a result of our actions, Okay. And the whole process is not only are we experiencing that which we've created the cause to experience, but in that process, this dynamic, we're actually creating the causes for future experiences. Okay. And so the point, I think, from a Buddhist practitioner view is to first of all become aware of those subtleties. To think about them. Use your own experience as a basis for this. And then to slowly shift. If you don't want this result, then shift the basis for the cause of those results. Okay. Because when we talk about virtue and non-virtue in a Buddhist sense, it's not about some God saying that this is right and this is wrong. Because we actually don't have a creator God. The teachings on virtue and non-virtue, or positive or negative, are completely based on what is the result of the action. If the result is a happy result, then it's considered virtue. If the result is a negative or suffering result, it's considered negative or non-virtue. It has nothing to do with any outside person saying that this is right and this is wrong. It's just up to your own particular experience. What do you want? And what is the cause of that experience? Okay. And it works on some level. It works on a very psychological level. Okay. So let's look at some of there's what we call 3 non-virtues of body, 4 of speech, and 3 of mind. There's killing, lying. Killing, stealing, and sexual misconduct are the 3 of body. 4 of speech are lying, divisive speech, harsh speech, and idle gossip. And then the 3 of mind are covetousness, ill will, and ignorance. Okay. And some of the results of those, when we study them, we can understand from a psychological perspective. Okay, killing. When we talk about the results, we classify those results into 4 different types of results. There's something we call throwing karma or ripening karma. That is the karma that ripens at the time of death, that determines where you will take rebirth. There's something called karma consistent with the result, or similar to the result. That is, in the case of killing, for example, that at some future point, or maybe even within this, your life will be shortened. You will be killed in some future point. Karma consistent with the action. If you kill, it kind of makes it easier to kill again, and you actually develop a habit. This, I think we can kind of see that, whether it's insects, animals, or people. Once you initially do something, I think if you go back to when you were a child, and something was forbidden, but then you did it, and then it seemed to be okay. So that was easier to do next time. Maybe not kill, but something, building those habits. And then there's what we call environmental karma. In the case of killing, the environmental karma is all the karma around our surroundings. It's kind of like, okay, we're all here in San Francisco, that's environmental karma. The fact that we're together is environmental karma. And then, the external factors that come into being. So for killing, it's usually the environmental karma would be being in a war zone or in a place of a lot of violence. Okay. So the point really is to look at these things from the basis of our own experience. Does it make sense? Okay. And then try to understand. Because if we have particular results in this lifetime that are suffering results, we can then look at the causes for those results and try to see if we can modify our behavior in any way. Okay? And then, of course, there are all the causes that we created in past lives. And there are particular practices, certainly within the Tibetan Buddhist tradition, that we can do to try to mitigate those from ripening in the future. Okay. The one thing that makes it a little bit difficult with cause and effect is that some of the results don't ripen in this lifetime. And some of the results we're experiencing in this lifetime is from a different lifetime. So there are different time periods associated with specific results. We can experience some things within this very lifetime. In fact, I think personally, some things you can experience very quickly the results of. There are other things stretch out over this lifetime, then next lifetime, and then future lifetimes. So it's a little bit hard for us to sometimes see that long-term aspect of future lifetimes, but it is real. You know, there's a continuity, but it's still difficult to kind of act in that way. But we want to look at our behavior. We want to look at the results we have now, because you actually can shift them in this lifetime if you start to get an understanding. And then we can also change so that we don't have future suffering. Okay. Killing. Taking the life of another being. This could be any being. There are differences in terms of which being it is. Probably the strongest karma around killing is taking the life of another human. And this makes sense if we think of how attached we are to our own body, our own life. So there's really a very, very strong mental, psychological imprint there when we are able to take another human life. So the actual result is much stronger in taking a human life than it is, for example, a fly, a mosquito. So, killing, not much to be said about that. Stealing, taking that which isn't offered. You know, I mean, it seems rather endemic in our culture if we look at the corporate world. There isn't much ethics around this so much here anymore, but it is. There are results. First of all, you don't have what you need in the future, or maybe in this lifetime, and this is the result of stealing. You have a tendency to steal. Others don't trust you with regards to possessions, things like that. We can think about these things, you know. Sexual misconduct. Engaging in a relationship, sexual relationship, that harms or hurts another. What is the result? Do you have trouble maintaining relationships? People don't stay together with you. From an environmental point of view, you live in a very dirty environment. As a result. Lying. We talked about that. People don't trust you. They don't believe you. Even when you have something valid to say, they're not going to listen. They don't believe you. You create a habit around lying. Divisive speech. This is when we divide people. set one person against another. What happens when we do that? Well, again, the result is similar to the cause. Other people are going to set us up. Other people are going to be critical of us, even if we have no basis for being criticized. Harsh speech. Again, we will be the victim of harsh speech. I and Lassiter, this is the one that we probably do the most of. And the meaning of our speech is not taken very valuable again. So, then we move on to covetousness. Covetousness, or is this greed? This is wanting what another has. Now, this could be both their job, their reputation, as well as their physical, material goods. So and this is just a mental one. Okay? This is where what we have is never enough. So we have this desire to have what someone else has. And so we become very kind of driven by this. And from a psychological point of view, what is the result? The result is that we don't have enough. In our own minds, we don't have enough. So you can see it's just kind of this interplay. Here we're looking at someone else to give us their goods and their reputation, everything is going to give us satisfaction. So on the flip side of that is that we ourselves don't feel we have enough. So it's not too far of a logic to see the connection between the two, just on a psychological basis. And this is actually the way we see things with this kind of mind is the story that we're creating for ourselves. It's not somebody else out there doing it to us. It's the story. It's our own mind and how it's painting the picture of our own experience. And you can check up on this. It's not because Buddha said so. Just check up. It makes sense. Ill will, wishing others harm. When we think of revenge, all these kinds of things that are going on in the world, that's ill will. Wishing someone else to be hurt, to be harmed. Again, the psychological state of mind. What is the result? The result is that we live in fear. We're wishing to harm others, so it just kind of comes back like as if we're looking in a mirror. Now what happens? We live in fear because others want to hurt us. We feel that others want to hurt us. They wish us harm. So we kind of it just comes back. And this is what our experience is. It's purely psychological here. That is the basis of our experience, and that is cause and effect. The last is ignorance. Here they specifically state, at least the teachings that I've taken, about ignorance, not just the ignorance grasping in a self that doesn't exist from its own side, but rather the ignorance of cause and effect, the ignorance of rebirth, the Four Noble Truths, things like that. And one of the results is that in the future you don't have access to these teachings, you don't have access to the practice. And part of that is because if you kind of dismiss these things, then of course you don't have the imprint, so that when they're there in the future, that you take them seriously in the future either. It's not that big of a distinction here. So, if you kind of dismiss them easily enough, then you won't necessarily have that connection in the future. That's what kind of ignorance is about. So, maybe one more thing before I open it up to some questions here, but for us to have what we call a complete karma, we need four things. We need the object, except in the case of a mental non-virtue. We need what we call the intention, and that's broken up into three pieces. That's both recognition, motivation, and delusion. And then we need the act, and we need completion. So you need four things for karma to be complete. Okay, so most of our actions are not complete, but some of them are. What do we mean by this? Okay. In order for you, I'm going to use the example of killing. In order for you to kill, you need the object, meaning you need the other thing that's going to be killed. Okay? With regard to the intention, you need the recognition. You need to recognize that that is the person you want to kill. If you kill the wrong person, it's not complete. But you have the recognition that that's the one. And you have the motivation to kill. And you have a delusion. The delusion could arise from attachment, meaning you're killing someone else's partner because you want out of attachment for the other one. Who knows? You're killing out of anger, or you're killing out of ignorance. Usually ignorance they talk about is for sacrifice in some of the religions when you sacrifice an animal or something like that. But anyway, so there's always a delusion, and one of the delusions is attachment, ignorance, or aversion, hatred. Okay, then you need the act of killing. You actually make the act and do the killing. Then you need completion. Okay, the being has to die. If the being doesn't die, it's not complete. It's a partial result. If in the act of killing the person kills you and you die first, then you have not completed that karma. It's a fine sticky point there, but it is made in the teachings. These four things that we talked about for complete karma really mostly come into effect in terms of throwing karma, right? But not complete. So just a little bit of way, it's a point of view in terms of the fine tuning that comes in terms of the weight of the result. Meaning if something's complete, the result is much stronger. And a lot of our actions aren't complete. They don't have all of these qualities to them. Okay? We engage in things a lot of time without recognition. Okay? Anyway, my point in talking really for us to kind of check up, does it make sense? You know, if somebody just taught you the 10 non-virtues and you know, there's going to be a lot of resistance from our kind of background here. It's almost like the 10 Commandments all over, going back to church. You know, and you're not just going to accept that just straight-faced. You need to think about it. Does it make sense? From a psychological point of view. Because remembering in the Buddhist perspective that all of this, all of our external reality, all of our mental process is our own doing. The way we see it is our own projection. There's 30, 40 views here of me sitting here. It's your view. You're also involved in how you view me sitting up here. It's not just me existing in this way, all be completely separate from you. How you see me is based on all of your previous experience. And believe me, there are different views in this room. If it were true that I existed this way completely by myself, then everyone would see me in the same way. Secondly, everyone would see me in the same way all of the time. I wouldn't be changing. But that's not true. So when we come to understand that it is our view of how we're experiencing the world, okay, and we understand the dynamics of cause and effect, then the point of it is how do we want to experience the world? And what can we do to have that ultimate experience? And that's when we start looking at karma and its results. And we start looking at how can I shift some of the habits I have. You know, it takes time, but it's doable. And then you can experience a completely different world. Being right in there amidst all of us. You know, even still, even within this world. For example, after 9/11, or even now with the war going on, we each have a different experience of what's going on. Some of us have more fear than others. Some of us have a more revenge type of thing. How is that different? How come we have different views? The same events happened. So that's our karmic experience of it. And that which we tend to draw to us is based on our own experience, our own karma. And ultimately, and this is really, really hard. It's very, very hard for me as well, sitting here after, 10, 15 years of practicing, that everything I experience, I have to accept responsibility for. That I am the cause of my own experience. And that when someone is doing something, that they're doing it to me, it's them, and I'm just a victim. I have to shift that mode of thinking. I have to accept responsibility. That at some point, I may not be able to see that point. I created the cause to have this particular experience. And what can I do to shift that in the future? But that ultimately, it is my responsibility. And the really, really powerful thing behind that is that because I am the basis of my experience here, the actions I've done, it empowers us to shift our experience. It doesn't depend on someone else. It only depends on us. And that I can change my experience. Because I have the ultimate responsibility for that. If I didn't, why bother? Someone else would come along and shift it. But it doesn't work that way. I am the result of all of it. And so I can't point fingers anymore. It doesn't mean that we don't make effort to try to change the group karma of the world. But we do have to remember that the job really begins right here. Okay. Yes.
Well, action, cause, effect is a pretty simple concept and we understand it intuitively. But I'm wondering, the opposite of action, inaction, not doing anything. You usually say that also has a cause and effect, and it actually doesn't exist because it is also action, it is a choice. And because you don't do certain things, you end up in a certain karma also, right? And that is, for me, somewhat difficult because it means I didn't do it and still I get bad results.
Could you be more specific about which inaction leads to which result?
I might not be doing what other people expect or what I think they expect. I might not be behaving the way people expect in a certain culture. I maybe don't take opportunities when there are for certain things like friendship or whatever. And so I'm stopping myself, right? You could say the stopping is is a action, but externally there is no action there. There is an inaction because I'm not doing certain things which I know I could be doing, and I cannot get over.
I'm not so convinced. I'm not so convinced that's completely inaction here.
No, that's what I'm saying. There's probably no such thing as inaction.
I think the inaction maybe is. I mean, it's either because what you were describing is like, okay, you're not engaged in certain behavior that others might have an expectation of you, but what's happening in your mind? Are you making a conscious choice not to engage in those behaviors, or are you just engaged in a different type of behavior? It doesn't mean you're not engaged in a behavior. It just may not be the type of behavior that culturally, from a cultural standpoint. So it's not really what I would say is actually inaction. There are what I would call, I don't know if I'd call them inactions, but I think when we sit and we meditate, there is a possibility that we might be able to slow down some of that mental stuff that's wandering all over the place and creating stories and ways of seeing things. But there's still results from that as well. There's in our tradition, of course, we do a lot of mantras, recitation and visualizations and things. And I remember years ago talking to Venerable Losang in a class she was teaching. And I said, well, what's the point of all this, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum? She says, well, you have a choice. You could be going around saying, kill, 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 kill. And, I mean, it's kind of, it's funny, but there's a point there to be made in some ways, and sometimes the prayers and practices we get engaged in, and certainly from my personal perspective, that maybe in some ways it's keeping my mind from going off in all these other directions. It may not have all of this other type of intended virtue associated with being so holy and thou, but it is at least keeping my mind from having all these other delusions or feeding into maybe. I'm just throwing that out there. But in particular, I don't know. Inaction is. I don't know if there's even meditative equipoise, maybe, but even that still has results.
Well, I don't know if he was referring to, or what comes up for me is that there's so much that needs to be done in the world, and you're just not participating politically or socially in making the world better, or even bad. Getting karma of non-doing.
Well, this is a good point to make here. Karma is action. Okay. We're not really saying that one should have non-action. We're just saying that one needs to check up, because one doesn't want a suffering result, so one should not engage in those actions which lead to suffering. So, if in fact we engage politically, socially, we need to check up. What is behind it? Is it tainted by the delusions? Is there attachment there? Is there ignorance? Is there aversion or hatred? One can engage in a political action, and there could be ignorance, because we certainly know that some of the politicians are ignorant. There could be attachment because some of the politicians may be engaged in feeding their own pocketbooks, and there could be hatred, creating an enemy. And so our own role in getting involved at a political level, we need to check up. If in fact, there is space there for us to benefit others, and we have a certain wisdom that that's what we can do, and we're not tainted by these three different delusions in particular, then by all means engage in the behavior, and we'll have a happy result. But we really, really need to know ourselves and know where we're at. Because I do know that even engaging, because I have engaged in protests against the war and things like that, I do know that there are people engaging in protests who do have anger. And I'm not saying it's, to some extent, they feel it's justified. But what I'm saying in terms of result is you're only creating a cause for a similar result. And so you have to be very, very clear that what you're doing with wisdom and with compassion is going to benefit. And that you really be clear. And so sometimes for many of us Buddhists, the first step is to work with ourselves. Okay? And to make some effort in working with ourselves. And then through that we can change the world. Believe me, you can. Because we do know that each individual does have an effect on those around us. So if in fact you have a happy mind, peaceful mind, loving mind, that's your own mind is going to be happy, but those who come in contact with you are going to have that energy. If you have a mind of hatred, critical mind, violent mind, people are not going to want to be around you. And that's the environment you're going to find yourself in. So it's very, very simple. So when we engage in this, we have to be careful not to go out just, get driven out there to do all this action if in fact we haven't worked on ourselves a bit. But by all means, if you can do it, that's fine. But really check up. Really check up. And we're all going to be in a different place with this. We're all going to be in a different place. And to remember, I think I keep on taking, going back from the larger view of the world and its chaos, and removing that down to the smaller levels. It starts here, and that kind of conflict we have here just gets slowly, it pervades the space around us, which then pervades the space around us. And to remember that the world is no more than a collection of nations, which is no more than a collection of states, which is no more than a collection of communities, which is no more than a collection of people, which is no more than a collection of friends and family, which is no more than a collection of God. So it just manifests out there. And so it's really, really, important to really check up before. It is a crazy world. We can see it. There's a lot of chaos and there's a lot of suffering right now. But be clear, really develop the loving kindness and compassion in your own heart. And then that's what's going to change the world. Yes?
I was thinking in terms of choice, if we were walking down the street, we saw a man beating on a small child and we didn't do anything about it. That would be an action that would seem to me to have negative consequences. That's an example of inaction. Things that
Again, it's not really inaction. Because at least, and remember there are three mental actions and non-virtues as well. But here, it depends on when you do come in connection with that action that's taking place. Okay? What is your mind doing? If you're fearful, then you disengage from it. But if you have no sense of self-preservation and you certainly engage and, stop the action, by all means. But if you become, attachment can arise. Attachment can arise, and you're going to take care of yourself, so you're going to get away from it. Aversion could arise, which means you're going to go and beat the hell out of the guy that's beating the child, which is not necessarily a positive engagement either. Or ignorance could arise. I'm not sure exactly how that would manifest. So again, I think it really depends. We're talking about you individually. It's not like there's any type of straight answer for anyone, and that's why we have to be careful about judging. And it depends, on the. You really have to look at it and judge for yourself. Know what's going on in your mind, and always reinforce it. I mean, in my tradition, it's like every practice we do is always we're reinforcing for the benefit of others, for the benefit of others, for the benefit of others. And it seems like a broken record, but at the same time, slowly over time, when you run into that circumstance, maybe you have a habit of for the benefit of others. And so you act in that way. And that's the intent, is to act for the benefit of others. And so then you make, with as much wisdom as you can in that situation, take the appropriate action. But not taking an action is not inaction. It is still action. Because there's some mental process that's interpreting what's going on. And so there is a result of that. So it's not, there's this thing of inaction, it's a strange term to use because I don't think I could quite place it. I don't think that there's anything we do as inaction. I mean, the only thing I was thinking that might come close is meditative equipoise or a single point of concentration. We might have a moment there of inaction, but I don't think there's such a thing as inaction.
I don't think there is either, but I think we can, honestly identify with feelings of omission in that category. That for maybe you just don't have time to take care to see that child. They're too busy to do that. Or whatever. So it is a choice, but I just think categorically we intuitively feel that if we don't do certain things, there's going to be negative consequences. And we may not be conscious of what the alternate choices that we're making internally are.
Just one example that comes to mind that was really in the news and stuff. Right? It's just there were American prisoner guards in that jail where all the torture took place that did not participate in the torture and actually were horrified by it, but who did not report it when it was happening. And I think that's an example of inaction reaping negative results.
Well, there is a tendency, and I mean, this is again, there's a tendency, first of all, for us to point fingers and say, you should have done this or you should have done that. Again, I'm going to reinforce this, is that each person is responsible for their own experience. So their inaction or not reporting, for example, they're going to have the result of that. We don't have to actually worry about it at all. We can still have a codified legal system that determines guilt and innocence. But particularly as an individual, I don't have to worry about their particular karma associated with that. Because in some ways, I don't know what was going on for them at that particular time. That they may have been, in fact, one of them did come step forward now, and he's been ostracized, he's been cut. And so the individual, based on where they are in that situation, may have had maybe self-preservation in mind, which is attachment, for not coming forward. Maybe they would have liked to, but, and I think we've all had experience when there's groups, sometimes group behavior, we're not able to step outside of that group or step above that group and say this is wrong. It's not always that easy. So I think to try to identify what was going on in those minds, it maybe helps us to come to develop some sense of compassion or wisdom about that particular situation. But I think, addressing another point, what I'm hearing is that, there are points with which the world tends to be overwhelmed. And that, in fact, we can't, as individuals, we can't particularly save the world and right all the wrongs. And at points, there are points where we get overwhelmed because we think we should act, and yet at the same time, we're very powerless to really actually change. And so there's a tendency to maybe pull back because we get so overwhelmed. Now, again, it's like understanding and being aware of where we're at and trying to change even the small thing, because it will reflect out. And if, in fact, you have the ability to, in fact, change out there, and you're not motivated by one of the delusions, then by all means go ahead and do it. But also, because this is where the thing comes in, is like, okay, I'm expecting a result from my action of acting in this case. And that, a new and better improved world out there. And that result isn't coming, so I get disappointed. Well, check your motivation. Because, in fact, you're attached to this idea that the world's going to be something else. And by your participation, you have that expectation. And now it isn't coming into being, so it disturbs the mind. We do this a lot. We want to control everything in the external world. And it's impossible. But we can control our own minds. And that's the point. I have time for one more question.
Now, the way you're describing this, it sounds like, well, I don't know how to say this. I mean, like a more Theravada perspective. With the Mahayana, the engagement is so important. I mean, I was sort of going, let's get my thought together, that you seem to be saying you need to really check out and wait to see what your motivations is, which I agree is the ongoing practice. But if you wait until you're perfected in that, you'll never do anything for a very, very long time. So, like this instance where this man, the man is abusing his child on the street, you would, as a school teacher, I'm doing this all the time, getting involved in the ruckus that's going on. And I have to kind of invest my karma in that, because it could upset me quite a bit, but I try and go in with equanimity, calm the situation down, and I sort of go into it with a view that my karma is at stake here, but I'm making that sort of sacrifice, of karma. I could, to step away is very easy and let it all go to chaos. Somehow when you're engaged in the world, you can't do that anymore. You can't see yourself as such an individual.
No, but you can practice, and I think my point wasn't that you take all this time to figure out your motivation. I mean, kind of in the moment, you've got to be clear, and you train yourself through practice to understand that have this awareness. Like, in the moment of those ruckus or whatever, you can easily determine whether you have aversion arising or attachment arising or whatever. You can, and you can also be motivated to act for the benefit of others.
While that,
you can, and we do, and this is, but I'm also saying be careful, because there is also this tendency to, go out there. I can see from the protests, and I know even personally last year, is to be very, very careful, especially as a monk, because of kind of the connotations that had, is I'm not angry in their faces. It's not appropriate for me to be angry out here, publicly, being angry. That is not an appropriate place for me. That's not appropriate, period. And as Buddhists, I think we need to take a look at that. It's like, it's not appropriate behavior. It's not karmically appropriate. And it doesn't mean that we don't act and we don't go out there in the street. It's just like, check up on the motivation, be of benefit to others. But use your wisdom. Because there is a lot of, and you will find that there's a lot of things that arise. Like, for me personally, it's like, I want to be in control. And if I'm not in control and my expectations don't get met, then I get, agitated. But that's my attachment to having things a certain way. And when those things don't happen, then I get upset. Well, hello. I need to just shift the way my expectations. I can't shift everyone else. I need to shift my expectations. Anyway, I think it's time to close.
If you can stay around, maybe there's a question that must be Are there any announcements?
Yes, a reminder that these talks are available on the internet at the GBF website, kbuddhist.org.
I'm not associated with the host. Okay. There's some goodies out there. Everybody knows the drill. Sometimes people go out for brunch. That's what they call us. There's Donna Bowl. Washington. Don't leave crumbs because they're rodents.
And you may have noticed in the last couple of months we've been trying to really shorten the break between the talk, between sitting and the talk. So if you would use the bathroom before the meditation begins, so we can really keep it short and not run this one over time. The talk. Is there a public coming up?
Yes. I have to look on the
It says the fifth.
Oh, it's on the meeting. 6:30. What is it?
The fifth.
Fifth. Okay. Very good.
In El Cerrito.
Okay.
Are there separate flyers out there?
No, not the driveway. I just wanted to ask, we had a number of people come in after the meditation started. Do we have a policy one way or the other? I mean, are people supposed to wait
Well,
outside?
there is a sign.
But the sign was turned the wrong way.
Oh, was it? But you're asked to.
Did they come in? Right.
I didn't know. I said the sign said come in. Well, to answer your question, the tradition is yes. It's a city. We ask people to wait, sit outside, join. Okay, well, let's join our circle.
Go ahead.
By the power and the truth of this practice, may all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all be free from sorrow and the causes of sorrow. May all never be separated from the sacred happiness which is without sorrow. And may all live in equanimity, without too much attachment or too much aversion, and live believing in the equality of all that lives. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.